Good evening. Welcome to Chapter 3, Innocence, from my novel Baby Moscato's Fantastical Adventures in Black Romance and Autobiography. So, I am going to take you back a little bit. I'm going to go back and forth from my childhood to my most recent sexual experience that I've had during my celibacy. Yes, you heard it right. So, I remember growing up in the Deep South in Mississippi. I grew up in a very religious household, and that I was one of four relatives out of the clan who went to church regularly. I was baptized in an African Methodist Episcopal church at the age of 7, and that's because one of my little girlfriends came up to me when we were playing hopscotch, and she said, "Are you baptized?" And I said, "Baptized? What's that?" She said, "You're not baptized? You're going to hell." And I didn't even know what hell was. I just knew it sounded horrible the way she said it. She had such a tortured look on her face. I ran up the steps into our house, and I said, "Mommy, I need to get baptized. I don't want to go to hell." And she just kind of stared at me like, "Where did this come from?" And at the time, we were staying with my grandmother and my grandfather, my dad's parents, and they looked at each other and said, "Well, let's take her to church this Sunday." And that Sunday, there was this big production. I remember walking down the aisle, and every person looked at me, all the adults, the children, and I had on this beautiful white dress, and I had my hair in a curly style. I had the black patent leather shoes with the white curly socks. Like, it was just, I had white gloves. I don't know if you all remember back in the 70s, and yes, I'm telling my age now. Back in the 70s, white gloves were a big thing for little girls in church. And I remember just, when them saying, "We're going to baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And do you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior?" And I said, "Yes." And they dumped me. I remember just feeling so overwhelmed by the weight of that water. But almost as soon as it felt as if I were not going to survive the dunking, the baptism, they pulled me back up. And everybody cried and laughed. And all I could think was, I'm cold and these clothes are sticking to my body and my hair is messed up. And why did they do my hair just to dump it in water, to dunk it in water? It didn't make sense. But I was saved. And so I took that very seriously. Like, at the time, my one other sister, she could have cared less about getting baptized. And my mom didn't want to go to church. She only went because she was dragged to church with my dad, and so, but I took it so seriously. I was in Sunday school, and I was reading, parables and making recitations and singing all of these things in our AME church. And I carried the honor of being in church with me to the point where it controlled how I acted amongst my peers. I never felt free. Like, other girls my age could have crushes on boys, and they could kiss boys, and they could talk about how they felt, and they could call boys cute. I thought, I can't do that because I'm supposed to be this holy, righteous little girl, and I'm baptized. And I carried that with me for so many years that it muted my ability to recognize my own burgeoning sexuality. Right? So when I had my first kiss at the age of 12, it seemed so illicit and clandestine. one of the neighborhood boys that I had a crush on, named Willie, who had a crush on me. He was about 2 to 3 years older than I was, and I remember thinking back on Willie that he just had a very rough background. Despite the fact that his mother was an alcoholic, his father was non-existent, he had several brothers and sisters, and everyone was poor. Willie always had a kind word for me. He was always so sweet. Whenever he saw me walking home from junior high, he would catch up with me, as he was walking home from high school, and he walked me home. He never tried to touch me, never did anything to me, just talk and I remember just feeling something, just feeling this fullness in my heart and somewhere else, and not knowing how to explain what I was feeling. I just knew that whenever he was next to me, I could smell his scent, and it was just so beautiful and musky. Like, you could tell his deodorant had worn off by the end of the day, and I didn't care. I wanted to bury my nose in the crevice of his arms, and I wanted him to hold me. And I remember at the age of 12 just feeling this wetness and not knowing or being able to associate that wetness with being next to Willie. But I was always so happy to see him. And he was so respectful. He would hold my books. Sometimes if he had a little extra change, he would buy me a soda. To this day, my favorite soda is Coca-Cola. And I can't understand why. Like, why do I like Coke so much? It's not good for you. I liked it because I associate happiness with it, right? Just happiness and laughing and my first crush. And to this day, when I drink Coca-Cola, I have like a little mini orgasm in my brain. It's amazing. So one day, Willie looked at me. He had a very interesting look on his face, and he said, "Let's go to the park." Now, the park was like directly across the street from my house. And normally my mom would not let me go to the park because the park was had very nefarious activities going on. All the drug addicts and some people there would be, just playing craps on the ground, and a lot of men were at the basketball court. And, she just said, no, stay in the yard. But she liked Willie. She trusted Willie. And she said, okay, you can go with Willie. And we walked around the park like in a little circle. It wasn't more than a quarter mile in circumference. And we just kept walking around the circle and talking. And I remember being like completely embarrassed because people were looking at us. And at that time, I was a very self-conscious little girl. I was painfully aware of every look and thought and whisper and hint. And it seemed as if everyone from the tiniest baby to the oldest man were staring at us. Was staring at us. And so, I was just kind of awkward. And at one point, I remember Willie reaching over and grabbing my hand. And then he whispered in my ear and he said, "Forget them. Forget them." And it was such a grown thing to say. I mean, think about it. I'm 12. He's about 14, 15. And at the time, I didn't consider him cute, but I loved him. I felt like at that time I loved Willie. He was the opposite of me in terms of phenotype. He was very golden colored, not as golden colored as Steph Curry. A little darker, of a darker undertone, right? He had sandy brown hair that was he wore in this 3-inch afro, and he had these kind of gold brown eyes, and he was like a big beefy dude. You could tell he was just, raised on cornbread and beans and neck bones, but he was solid, right? And the fact that now looking back on that time, I can recognize that he was, burgeoning into a beautiful young man, but I didn't quite understand why I was reacting to him. Just shows me how much I had muted that part of my sexuality. How ashamed I was at being able to appreciate the male form, right? When we had walked around that park 10 times, we had a light sweat on our foreheads. Willie said, "Come over here. Let's go stand over here by the recreation center." So the recreation center was like in full view of the basketball court. And at the time on the court, there were several young men that I knew from junior high and high school, and some, older adults that kind of sat throughout the neighborhood. And I was like, oh, this is a lot of eyes on us. Like, I just didn't like the eyes. And so I kept asking, "Well, let's just go over here behind the tree and sit down on the bench." He said, "No. I want you to come over here." And so I let him take me by the hand and walk me over to the rec center. And the rec center had this little mini porch that was comprised of bars, similar to the monkey bars. So it's just a three bar rectangle, and then the wall of the rec center. So Willie kind of semi-forcefully and gently at the same time placed me against the bars so that the top part of my butt were pressed against the bar. And then he moved up to me and he took both of his legs and he straddled me with a leg on each side. And then he took his right arm and placed it around my back. And I was just breathless. I didn't know what he was doing. And then he took he took his left hand, he placed his left hand under my chin, and he tilted my face up, and I still didn't know what he was about to do. And he reached down and just gave me the softest kiss. It was a kiss of the ages. It was my very first kiss. I had never kissed a boy or anyone before that moment. That moment, I lost my kissing virginity. And so he just kind of like lightly kissed. First, he gave me one firm kiss in the middle of my mouth. And then he gently pressed his tongue into my lips. I didn't know what he was doing. I'm like, why is his tongue in my mouth? And then he pulled it out. And then I became wet. I still couldn't associate the wetness with him being pressed against me. I was like, oh my God, I'm peeing on myself. And then he began to kiss my lip, like every millimeter of my lip, the top, the bottom, the sides. He would like lightly flick his tongue out and lick my lip and kiss. And it was as if he were trying to teach me how to kiss, because I was just stiff. And all of a sudden, I just kind of melted into his arms. And I wrapped my arms around his waist, and I pressed my pelvis into his, and I followed his lips. And I let him teach me. And I began to nibble on his lips. And I began to stick my tongue into his mouth. And it was amazing. And I didn't hear or see anybody around us. I didn't care. I was just caught up in what I was feeling. And at one point, he took his right hand from around my back and he brought it to my breast. At the time, I didn't have any breasts. I had little ping pong balls on my chest. But he took them and he cupped it. And he kind of lightly rubbed. And then at that point, I kind of pulled back because I was breathing very shallowly. And I was like, there's people out here. And when I looked up, all the men were still playing basketball. No one was paying attention to us but one person. And that was like the neighborhood gossip. This boy who wore like the scary curl, and he had bad acne, and he had like a long torso with short legs. He was the goofiest looking dude I'd ever seen. And he was just messy and mean. And I remember just thinking, oh God, if all people to see me kissing. What was his name? I can't remember. I just call him the Jerry Curl dude. And so Willie saw me looking at him. And he said, don't worry about him. I said, I better stop. And he said, okay. How do you feel? And I remember just being wet. And I said, and he said, well, did you like it? I said, yeah, I liked it. I liked it a lot. He said, good. You can do that some more. problem is we never did it anymore. Like, that was the first and the last time Malia ever kissed me. And to this day, I'm racking my brain. And I don't know if that were a good thing or not, or I just don't know. I just know that I wanted more. And at the same time, I was very ashamed at what I was feeling at that moment. And I felt dirty because we did it in the park in front of people and someone saw me. And what made matters worse is that the boy with the jerry curl came up to me like later that day when I was walking to the store to go buy a Suzy Q and a Coke. And the first thing he said to me was, "Ooh, I'm going to tell Beverly. I thought you were a good girl." And then he walked away. Now, Beverly is my mom. I don't know how he knew her name was Beverly, but the fact that he said, I wasn't even concerned about him threatening to tell my mom. It was not having the good girl designation. That shut down everything. Like, I said to myself that moment, I'll never, ever, ever do anything untoward again. I am a good girl. Oh God, forgive me. Little did I know how much that would affect my attitudes towards affection and sex from that point forward. This is part 1. Part 2 is next. Be well.